Hello, Baltimore Design School. My name is Miss Zay. I'm one of the architecture teachers at the high school. I've noticed, along with some of the other pathway teachers, that some of our 10th grade students have trouble with measuring, and you need to know how to measure using imperial units, whether you are doing fashion design, architecture, or graphic design. So I wanted to do a quick review with you of how to read a ruler and also help you make a cheat sheet. So if you'll notice, between 0 and 1, there's 16 little marks. Every ruler might be a little bit different, but most often they have 16 marks. So we're going to make a cheat sheet that represents the inch from 0 to 1, and it labels each one of those little divisions so that you're able to measure more confidently, and then eventually you won't need this at all. So to start out with, you need a blank strip of paper. This is going to represent our inch from 0 to 1. So I'm going to take a marker and I'm going to label over here 0. And on the other end, I'm going to label 1. Now, this inch is divided into 16 parts. So let's just start out with 2 parts. So I'm going to fold my paper exactly in half. Make sure you crease the folds and then open it back up. I'm going to draw a line about 3/4 of the way down this piece of paper, and I'm going to label this line 1/2 and put in quotation marks to represent inches. Now this mark is telling me that of the 2 pieces that my inch is divided into, this first line represents one of those pieces. So here's the beginning, 1/2, 1 inch. Okay, let's say we want to divide this again though, so that we can measure 1/4 inches. So I'm going to take one end of my paper and I'm going to fold it into the middle and give it a nice crease. Same thing on the other end. I'm going to fold my paper, bring it into the middle, and give it a good crease. Now my paper is split into 4 equal parts. I'm going to draw a line about halfway down my paper, and I'm going to draw another line over here about halfway down my paper. Now this first part represents one of the 4 parts, so I'm going to label it 1/4. This represents 2/4, which is the same as 1/2, so I'm not going to label it. This line represents 3 of the 4 parts that I have made, so I'm going to label it 3/4. Now sometimes my students get confused when I say 1/4 inch or 3/4 inches instead of saying 1/4 or 3/4. So if you are one of those, just remember that 4 quarters make up a dollar. So a quarter is the same thing as 1/4. We're going on to 1/8 inches. So for this, we're going to do some accordion folds. So starting at the 0, I want you to fold your paper into that line you made at the 1/4 mark. Then you're going to fold your paper back, fold it over, fold it back over to the 1/2 inch mark. So I'm taking each of these and dividing them in half again. Fold it over, accordion it back to the 3/4 inch mark. Try to make sure that your folds are really even and straight. And then this last one. Okay, so when I'm done folding that, I'm going to have split my paper into 8 even parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Each of these pieces represents 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to draw lines on my new folds, and I'm going to bring those lines about 1/4 of the way down my paper. So the first line represents 1 out of 8 parts, so I'm going to label it 1/8 of an inch. Again, the quotation marks represent inches. This is 2/8 of an inch, which is the same as 1/4, so I don't need to relabel it. This represents 3/8 inches. This represents 4 out of 8 inches, which is the same as 1/2, so I don't need to label it. This line represents 5 out of 8 inches. 5/8 of an inch. This represents 6/8 of an inch, which is the same as 3/4 inches, so I don't need to label it. This line represents 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to write that in. Now I have a representation from 0 to 1, and I have all my measurements labeled up to 1/8 of an inch. So that ruler we looked at, though, that one had 16 divisions in between 0 and 1. So we're going to divide this one more time. So again, we're going to be accordion folding starting at the 0. Folding into the halfway point, folding back. So I'm dividing my paper into 16 parts, folding back and forth. I'm going to keep folding until I get halfway down my paper. And then I'm going to restart at the other end just to make it a little bit easier to make the fold. Sometimes it gets hard to fold the paper when it gets that thick. So I'm accordioning it back. Again, dividing each of these into half again so that I have 16 parts. Okay, when I unfold this, I now should have a paper that's divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 pieces. At each of these, I'm just going to make a tiny little mark, tiny little line coming down. Try to keep them about the same lengths. I'm only putting the marks at the new folds. Okay, so last time we need to do this. My first mark represents one of 16 pieces, so it's 1/16 of an inch. 2/16 of an inch is the same as 1/8 of an inch, so I don't need to label it. My next mark is 3/16 of an inch. My next mark is 4/16 of an inch, which is the same as 1/4 inch, so I don't need to label it. My next mark is 5/16 of an inch. The mark after that is 6/16 of an inch. That's the same as 3/8 of an inch, so I don't need to label it. My next mark is 7/16 of an inch. The mark after that is 8/16 of an inch, which is the same as 1/2 inches, right? Because 8 is half of 16. So I don't need to label that one. After 8/16 comes 9/16. 10/16 is the same as 5/8. 11/16 gets labeled. 12/16 is the same as 3/4. 13/16 gets labeled. 14/16 is the same as 7/8 of an inch, so it does not get labeled. My very last mark represents 15 out of 16 parts of this inch. So I'm going to put in 15/16 inches. Okay, so now your cheat sheet is totally done. And this is how you would use it to help you measure. So let's say I have this book and I want to measure the width of it, but I'm having some trouble reading my ruler. So I'm going to roll around on my architectural scale until I find the inches side. And then, let's see if I can get this to focus on here. It's a little hard to see. Okay, so I'm going to start out at 0. And then first I count up my number of whole inches. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know I have 4 inches, but then I have some pieces of an inch. So I'm going to make sure my 0 is still nice and aligned with the edge of the book on that end. And then on this end, I'm going to count the number of little lines I have, right? So I have, after the 4, I have 1, 2, 3 little lines. I know each of those lines represents a 16th. So I'm going to come over here to my ruler cheat sheet. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. And I can see right away that it's 3/16 of an inch, and there's no other name for it. I can't reduce it. So, however, if I were to measure the book the other way, so starting at 0, I'm going to notice that the end of it over here is a number of lines over, so I'm going to go ahead and count them. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's 14 little lines after the 6. So I'm going to come over here and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I know that my book is going to be 6 and 7/8 of an inch. All right, good luck measuring.